born, bound by nostalgic hyperbole, rooted and fertilized by the souls of displaced Africans, displaced from that transatlantic slavery. No one knows the exact origin of this tale. The details seem different depending upon who you are talking to, but the meaning of it stays the same. The tale was forged somewhere between the wisdom of West Africa and the tragedy of American slavery. It is the story of the people who could fly. The tale begins on the island of St. John as displaced Africans who had been mislabeled as slaves toiled in the hot sun under the devious and watchful eye of a nameless slave driver. Among this group of coffee, black, mocha brown, and caramel-colored people was a woman tending her child as she picked cotton. She had such dexterity that she could pick cotton with her right hand and caress the cheek of her child with the left. She was picking cotton, exhausted from the pressure of working in humid conditions, when her body gave out under the stress and weight, in the words of Du Bois, of being a problem and property. She collapsed from the weight of this stress and strain. Her strong yet frail body simply collapsed under the weight of waking up every day between the tragedy and absurdity of a people who claimed to be Christian but always lived in contradiction. This woman, this nameless woman, fell to the ground. Her boy, simply about 6 or 7, tried to wake Mama up, not knowing what would happen, but knowing that if work stopped, that the slave driver would bring sudden, swift, and fast punishment. The slave drivers noticed the woman had fallen under the gaze of the shadow of cotton, and they climbed their beasts of burden to ride over to the place where she disappeared. They moved across the field. Before the driver could reach her, an old man called preacher and prophet by his people, but old devil by the slave master, rushed to her side. The little boy looked up into the kind face of this old man, and he simply said, "Is it time?" The old man just smiled, nodded and uttered a word in the boy's ear and in the mother's ear, and simply said, "Kuliba." The woman miraculously gained strength, and when the word entered her ear and landed upon her spirit, as a matter of fact, the other Africans stopped working and were looking to see as they were witnessing the birth of a woman who was called slave, but was all of a sudden becoming queen. She looked toward the slave drivers who were riding on their beasts of burden toward her, and then looked toward her son, grabbed her son's hand, they looked up toward heaven, and they started to fly. She grasped the hand, and they took up toward the heavens. The slave drivers lost their composure, trying to figure out, could not make sense of human flight. And during their brief moment of disbelief, the prophet and the preacher made his way to other enslaved Africans and kept whispering in their ear, "Kuliba, Kuliba, Kuliba." The Africans rose from the fields and began their flight to freedom. Can you imagine the sight? The dehumanized flying, 3/5 of a person flying, the disenfranchised flying, the disempowered flying, the discouraged flying, the dismissed flying, the dismembered flying, the disadvantaged flying, the disinherited and dislocated were now flying, all taking flight with such grace and beauty that the world had not yet seen. The slave drivers grabbed the old man, beat him within an inch of his life. They interrogated him and beat him more, and he smiled with blood rushing down his cheek. The slave masters demanded, "You bring back our property." And the old man said, "I can't." You see, once the word is in them, it will never leave them. The old man is given an ancient word. He was a steward of the mysteries. This word, kuliba, originated on the shores of West Africa. He did not create it, he just spoke it. The prophet did not keep the word, he just passed on the word. He did not own it, but the word owned him. There was something about this old man, this preacher, that reminds every woman and man who is called by God what we are called to do. We are not called in any any way, shape, or form to make people shout. We're not called to make people happy or dance or feel good. We are not called to preach what people want to hear. Right. We are called to give a kuliba word. Yeah. A word that will move in one's spirit so that people will take flight from their breakdowns to their breakthroughs. Beyond dehumanizing destructive activity, we are called to place a word in people where they literally will fly. We are called to be a conduit for the kuliba. And if we want this generation to take flight, we desire for preaching to continue to empower people to fly. But unfortunately, most preaching keeps people grounded, so they can't take flight. They can't even see the runway. Because the preaching that we seem to give lacks any imagination and power. The task of the preacher is to wrestle with what I call the blue note of life and find the assurance of grace in the gospel. The blue note preacher requires a different hermeneutic. The preacher is required to do all the academic work, the exegetical digging, but these are simply tools. Don't let that go ahead of the preaching. The preacher is required to submit to the Spirit and be possessed by divine imagination. The preacher, the Blue Note preacher, views the preaching task as art. Words are the preacher's craft, the paintbrush of the painter, the instrument of the composer. This is art, not technical precision. Art deeply expressed through the personality of the preacher. Thomas Merton gives a definition of art. Art enables us to find ourselves and lose ourselves at the same time. Blue Note preaching is the creation of an alternative world, an alternative consciousness. It is an act of being found and lost. As the story of the people who could fly illustrates, the preacher breathes a word into the people, and they are found, and they are given life. They rise above degradation and the plantation. The story is about the story of being consumed by a power beyond oneself.